My name is Mark and I'm a detective. Not like on the force or anything. A private eye, like in the movies. It's kind of the family business. My grandfather was one, and my dad and I both grew up in that world, and it was only natural for me to go into it too. It's not as exciting a job as you would think if you go by Hollywood. It's mostly sitting in your car for 10 hours at a time, waiting to take pictures of cheating spouses to show the other spouse who is paying you to prove that they're being cheated on. It's kind of a bummer sometimes. People get married, they get cheated on, they get divorced. So often, kids are caught up usually in the middle of it. Now and then something crazy usually comes your way though, or something exciting. I want to tell you guys about one of the craziest ones. The craziest possibly. It happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still can't convince myself that it was real. I'm not religious and I don't believe in the supernatural. At least, I didn't until Benson Street. Now I'm just not sure. A woman got a hold of me August of 2020. She had lost contact with her sister. She came into my office and spun a pretty crazy story. Her sister lived in a small town in Michigan called Franklin's Green. My client was named Shelley. She was 62 and her sister was a little bit younger. They were close and spoke almost every day, but for the last month, her sister hadn't answered any of her calls. And then Shelley did a little digging and came across a couple of little news stories that were a little hard to believe. They said that everyone who lived on Benson Street had gone missing. There were a total of 8 houses on the dead-end street, and every person who lived in them had seemingly just vanished into thin air. I mean, I read the story myself. After Shelley left, I did my own digging, and she was right. That was honestly crazy, and I was a little surprised that this story hadn't gotten more attention. I called Shelley back that night and told her that I would take her case. I didn't usually travel that far for a job, but the next morning I packed a few things and left my office in Cincinnati. Hours later, I arrived in Franklin's Green. There was a little crappy motel, and I checked in and then headed right to Benson Street. It was smack dab in the middle of this little sleepy neighborhood, lower middle class, mostly ranch-style homes. The entrance to Benson Street was completely roped off with yellow police tape stretched between a telephone pole and a stop sign. I parked nearby and decided to canvass the surrounding areas. I knocked on doors, stopped and chatted with an old man out watering his garden and stuff like that. No one had much for me. Everyone on Benson Street had simply been there one day and gone the next. No one knew why. The people I spoke with were happy to share their theories with me though. The street was full of drug addicts who had all gotten high and wandered off. There was a gas leak that killed everyone in their sleep, and the gas company removed the body to avoid suspicion. Nothing I was told seemed very likely. By the time I had spoken with a number of people, the sun had gone down. I debated going back to the motel and starting the next morning, but I thought I would at least check out Shelley's sister's house. I grabbed my flashlight from my duffel bag in my trunk and ducked under the yellow tape. Shelley's sister's name was Mary, and she had been married to a guy named Tom for nearly 40 years. They had 2 children who were grown up and lived out of the state. Shelley had told me that they were worried about their mother and their father as well, and hadn't been able to even reach them, nor had Mary and Tom reached out to them. Mary's house was third on the left, and I did a slow circle around it, shining my flashlight in the dark. I'm not sure what clues I was looking for, but there were none to find. One thing that took me by surprise was just how big this house really was on Benson Street, and how it was compared to the rest of the neighborhood. I made my way back around to the front of the house and went up to the porch. I tried the doorknob and was surprised to find that the door was unlocked. I was sure that the cops had been through all of these houses on this street, but as I stepped inside, I saw no evidence of this. I worked through the ground floor slowly, resisting the urge to turn the lights on as I went. I didn't want to draw my attention, and one of these houses with lights burning in every window would be very noticeable to anyone who drove past Benson Street. The home was eerie. It really was as if Mary and her husband had simply just vanished. There was a half-empty can of Coke on the kitchen island, and dishes that needed to be washed in the sink. A cloud of flies buzzed here and there, eating the food residue that had been waiting to be cleaned away. A door in the kitchen opened up to a set of stairs leading down. I decided to save the basement for last and went upstairs instead. I worked slowly, just as I had on the ground floor. There were 4 bedrooms. The master bedroom was the married couple's, obviously, and another bedroom was a guest bedroom. The 3rd bedroom had been converted into an office. The laptop on the desk there was dead. I found the charger and plugged it in and went into the 4th bedroom, which had a treadmill and exercise bike. I had saved the master bedroom for last and worked my way through the dressers there, finding nothing but clothes. The closet was another story. There was a shoebox up on the shelf, hidden underneath unfolded bed sheets and hand-stitched quilt. I pulled the box down and opened it, surprised to find a knife. The knife was ornate, the blade curved, and the hilt made of bone and wrapped in leather. Etchings had been carved into the bone, and I unwrapped the leather to better see. I can only describe the etchings as strange runes, almost like an alphabet. They were very letter-like, but damned if I knew what they meant. I took pictures of the knife and then placed it back in the box and hid it once again. All that was left was the basement, and I was surprised to realize I had been pulling it off, even dreading going down there. I had no other choice though, and headed down into the kitchen with heavy steps, and then down once more. I swept my light across this open basement. It was unfurnished, the walls cement, as well as the floor. Small frosted windows sat near the beams from the floor above. The basement just had been used for storage. I found cardboard boxes filled with Christmas decorations and small wooden chests filled with important papers like birth certificates and old pay stubs. Above me, the creek. I froze and turned my light off. A thud. Another creak. Someone was walking around on the ground floor. I wrestled with what to do, and I could feel my heart thumping wildly in my chest. Did I call out? Admit that I was trespassing? Did I go upstairs and try to sneak out? Did I stay and hope they didn't come down? I crept slowly to the foot of this wooden stair that I had come down. I had left the basement door open and cursed myself for my stupidity. I listened to the footsteps above me. Sweat stung my eyes and I wiped it away. The footsteps came into the kitchen and I moved away from the bottom stairs. I looked for a place to hide and wedged myself in between a stack of plastic totes along the wall just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. I held my breath. I peeked out, but it was so dark down here I couldn't see much more but a dark shape. I paused at the foot of the stairs and then turned and went back up. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but what probably was only maybe 10 minutes. I didn't hear any movements upstairs. I left my hiding spot and then went to the foot of the stairs again. I took them slowly, exiting into the kitchen and then shutting the door as quietly as possible. I paused there for a long time, listening. If anyone else was still in this house, they weren't moving. I hurried to the front door and pulled it open. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. I rushed off of the porch and into the middle of the street. I turned and looked at the house and felt sheer terror as my eyes swept up to one of the windows that looked out at the street from the master bedroom. Someone was standing there, staring right at me. The same dark shadow, the same one that I had seen in the basement. I turned and ran down the street to my car. I rushed to the motel and went inside my room. The locked door wasn't enough. I pushed a heavy circular table in front of the door. I then found myself exhausted. I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamed of a dark shape with a curved blade. When I woke the next morning, I thought about going to the local police and telling them who I was and who had hired me. But in my experience, most cops don't take kindly to private detectives, and I was afraid they'd keep me from Benson Street. So, I showered, dressed, and headed back over. I felt a little bit more comfortable in the daytime. I went back into Mary's house and looked for evidence of someone else having been there the night before, but found none. Then I went back outside and started at the end of the street and tried the front doors as I moved around the cul-de-sac and went up to the other side. A lot of doors were locked, but 2 were unlocked. The house I could enter were a lot like the ones I had been in the night before. It seemed as if whoever was living here had just up and vanished and left without taking anything. In the first house, I found a full set of luggage, and it didn't seem like the overstuffed closet or the drawers full of clothes had even been touched. No one had packed for a trip. In the other house, found something rather alarming. It sat right out on the bedside table in the master bedroom. A knife, exactly like the one I had found in Mary's house, hidden away. The same bone handle, the same ruins into it, the same carving of the blade, sharp as can be. I went back into the middle, unlocked house and began to search. It took me a couple hours, but then I found it. Stashed away in a floor vent, an identical knife. I left quickly and went to my car. I found a little diner and stopped for lunch and sat at a table with my phone, searching online for any sort of information I could possibly find on these knives. I searched for news about cults in the area and came up with nothing. I had taken pictures of the knives and tried to find anything about the ruins, but ran into dead ends there as well. After lunch, I went back to Benson Street and stood on the sidewalk. I was fairly sure that if I broke into the locked homes, I would find knives as well. I walked slowly past the houses and paused at the end of the street. Past the end of the road were woods, mostly evergreens. A dirty little path cut from the end of the street through the lawns of 2 of the homes in front of me into the trees. I started down the path. It was well worn and continued well into the woods, curving around trees and overgrown plants. I walked along it for nearly half an hour before I saw it. The church was old and made of wood, squat and slanted. A spire went up and over the front double doors, a strange symbol that resembled the inverted cross, made of what looked like iron nailed to the front. I went to the building and tried the doors. They opened freely. Surely the police hadn't missed this strange building. Inside were a few rows of pews and an altar at the back in the large open room. A large leather-bound book with yellow pages that curled at the corners sat open on this altar next to the silver cup stained with red inside. I couldn't read the book. It was written in the same strange runes that were etched on the handles of these knives. I took pictures of a few of these pages and hurried back outside. Standing in the church, I had this feeling. It was a growing sense of unease, almost like I was being watched. I thought of the shadowy figure that had been watching me from the window of Mary's home, and then I shivered. I went back to Benson Street and rushed to my car. I drove to the safety of the motel and went in and locked the door, barring it once more with the table. I called Shelley and told her about the church. She had never heard of her sister or brother-in-law speaking of it. I hung up with her, and it struck me for the first time that the sisters were named Mary Shelley. One of their parents had a literary sense of humor. I called Mary and Tom's two children next, one after the other, and I asked about their parents' religious stances. They told me their parents were Catholic, but not practicing. Church hadn't been the thing in their lives as kids. I sat on the end of the bed and scrolled through the internet, trying to find some strange inverted cross sigil I had seen on the front of that church. It took hours, but eventually I found it. I clicked on the picture, and it took me to an amateur website that seemed to be about various demons and housebonds. It was the symbol of something called the Nameless One, and it was said that he brings his followers great wealth and power in exchange for sacrifices. I thought immediately of how the homes of Benson Street were much bigger than those nearby. I set my phone aside and shivered. The whole thing was freaking me out. I do not scare easily, but that job I had taken was proving to be one of the strangest ones, and I couldn't get over the feeling that I was messing with something that I really shouldn't. When the sun went down, I drove to the local bar, a place called Mel's. It was busy, and I took a stool at the bar and had a beer. Over the course of a few hours, I spoke to a few townspeople about Benson Street. I was truthful with who I was and what I was doing. A lot of the people clammed up when I brought up the street. I didn't ask about the church or the symbols I had seen, but I did ask about the houses and how they seemed to be so much more expensive. One old guy gave me something. Everyone on that street was a weirdo, he told me, and we all know it. Wherever they are, it isn't good. Another patron of the bar brought up how people in this area had been going missing regularly for the last few years. Drifters and homeless folk, no one important, no one who got the police involved very much. Back in my motel, I called Mary and Tom's oldest. I asked if they had grown up in the house in Benson Street, and he told me no. His parents had bought it a few years ago after Tom had retired a few years early. I thanked him and hung up. I was asleep when a thump on my door awoke me. I went to the peephole and peered out, but could see no one. Fear gripped my heart with its icy hand. I went to the window and carefully pulled the blinds back to the edge and looked onto the open parking lot. A line of 4 people stood there, right in the middle of this black pavement, staring right at my room. It was dark and I couldn't quite see or make out who they were. Man or woman, I couldn't tell. I had no idea of their age. They wore dark clothing, robes of some sort, with hoods pulled up. As I watched, they turned as a group and walked out of this lot and to the one across the street. I watched them until they faded into the darkness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning I went back to Benson Street. I was so drawn to it, or more specifically to the church in the woods. I hurried down the path and entered this strange building again. No one else had been there. The book and the cup that had been on the altar were gone. I did a more thorough search of this building and found a small trap door just behind the altar. I lifted the hatch up and shined my light into the hall. A rickety wooden ladder led down 10 feet or so to a dirt floor. I took a deep breath and started to climb down. There was a tunnel curving away to the right after I got off the ladder and turned around. I kept my light on and crept forward. It twisted this way and that until it opened up into a large chamber, and I found the people who had lived on Benson Street. They all lay dead on a dirty floor, nude with their arms crossed over their chests. I needed to tell the police. I turned and came face to face with a man in a hooded robe. "Intruder!" he screamed at me, and I pushed past him and ran. I knew he was chasing me. I could hear these heavy footsteps right behind me. A chill blew through the tunnel as I ran. Voices burst forth from nowhere, speaking a language that I couldn't understand. I got to the ladder and began to climb. I got to the top and rolled out of this hole, turned and then used my foot to slam the door shut. There was no way to latch it. I stood and turned, shocked to find 100 more of these candles had been placed thoroughly throughout this church. They were all burning. Then, there were more robed figures. One came at me as the trap door behind me burst open, and my original pursuer came through. I tussled with the new robed figure. He wrapped his arms around me, but I shoved him off into the altar. The candles there shook and then fell. A musty carpet that led from the altar to the front door lit immediately. Soon, the room was alive with flames. The robed figures howled and I was forgotten as they attempted to put out the fire. I ran to the door and burst it open into the woods. It was still morning. The sun hung low in the sky, and the light getting cut off by many trees. I turned and looked at the church. It was burning. No one came out after me. I turned and ran for Benson Street. I didn't stop running until I made it back to my car. I drove to the motel, checked out, packed up my things. I didn't call the police until I was about an hour away from this town. I told them what I found and hung up before they could start asking me questions. Then, I called Shelley and told her everything I had found. The knives, the church, the robed figures. I could tell she didn't believe me, and then she started to cry and curse me out for not giving her something real. I understood though. I hardly believed these words coming out of my own mouth. In the end, I didn't speak with Shelley again. I didn't go after her for the unpaid balance she owed me. A week or so later at home, I searched the internet for any sort of news stories about the church behind Benson Street, but only found one little article that had been written in a local paper about a fire in the woods there. It didn't mention the church. In the 3 years since then, I've seen robed figures a handful of times. Sometimes I don't trust my own eyes and wonder if I'm just hallucinating. I don't think I am. I think the followers of the Nameless One are keeping an eye on me. They never approached me. They never threatened me. But they are there, right? They are watching. Thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you would like to see more, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to the channel and like what you heard, make sure to subscribe. Got a lot of content, a lot more coming, trust me. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have a collab video Sunday. Don't quote me on that, but we might. Make sure to check out the links in the description as well, Twitter, Instagram, yada yada, you know. And also, submit your stories if you have one, pretty please. But with that being said, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one.